Unbeaten heavyweight prospect Jared Anderson has said that he would love to fight Daniel Dubois. Now, Dubois is currently the holder of the WBA regular heavyweight title, so I can see why Anderson would be calling him out and looking to target him, ideally, because you'd think Dubois is more available than the other champions in Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, who are going to be tied up with unifications, mandatories, big money fights, and so on. They're not really going to be looking at a Jared Anderson to give him a voluntary shot, uh, to have a voluntary defense against Jared Anderson. They're not really going to be doing that in the foreseeable future. But someone like Daniel Dubois, who has this secondary WBA heavyweight title, that's more realistic because you got two young guys. Anderson's 22, Dubois 25, and this was kind of the normal age for heavyweight contenders in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. It was normal for them to be fighting for titles in their early mid 20s. Nowadays, it's kind of a rarity. You got guys fighting for titles when they're late 20s, 30s. In the case of Joe Joyce, he's 37 and he hasn't fought for a title yet. Obviously, he turned pro very late, started boxing very late as an amateur. Anyway, Anderson against Daniel Dubois, I'd love to see it. I can't imagine Frank Warren would want that fight. Frank Warren works with Bob Arum, who represents Jared Anderson. So if there was a desire to do the fight, it could get made quite easily. But yeah, I don't think Warren would want it. I suspect that Bob Arum would want it more than Warren because of what Daniel Dubois has, his secondary WBA belt. And I also suspect that Bob Arum has more confidence in Jared Anderson than Frank Warren has in Daniel Dubois because of what happened to Dubois in that Joe Joyce fight. Now, Jared Anderson hasn't fought anybody as good as Joe Joyce yet, so you don't know whether he would do any better than Daniel Dubois did. You may think he would. I think he would, but you don't know. You have to see him in there in adversity against high-level opposition to find out exactly, what's what. But again, just based on hunches, assumptions, maybe the experience that Bob Arum has and the sparring stories of, Jared Anderson doing very well against Tyson Fury in the gym, this, I think, would give Arum a lot of confidence of putting him in there against Dubois. So that's my take on it. I'd love to see it. I would probably pick Anderson to win because, I don't know, Dubois is a very powerful young man. He hits hard, but he's very stiff. He's very Bruno-esque. He's far more like Frank Bruno than Anthony Joshua ever was in terms of his style and his upright nature. And, he's quite slow and stuff like that. He's far more like Bruno than AJ ever was stylistically. And even in terms of his personality, he's a bit more like Frank Bruno. Bruno was funny. Dubois doesn't really come across as funny. But Bruno was never, how can I describe it? I don't want to be mean to Bruno, but he never came across as the most smart guy. Do you know what I mean? He didn't come across, I would say, as dumb, but he didn't come across as the sharpest minded guy in the world. Anderson, I know he's young and naive and doesn't know that much about life in the grand scheme of things yet. He just seems to have a sharper mind on him than Daniel Dubois. And that doesn't always translate to the ring, but I think a lot of the time it does. The way that Anderson fights, it looks like someone who has a sharper mind. You know what I mean? Dubois is very rigid and very formulaic. Dubois used an analogy one time where he compared Badu Jack to, he was comparing Badu Jack and James DeGale, and he said, Jack is like R&B, whereas James DeGale is like jazz. Right? So with DeGale, there was an element of freestyling, there was an element of spontaneity, there was an element of unpredictability, creativity, right? And that's the same thing I see. And by the way, I'm not saying that one is better than the other with regards to R&B and jazz, right? I'm just talking about Dwyer's analogy at the time, which was a funny one and a good one. But Yeah, similar situation with Jared Anderson and Dubois. With Anderson, I just see a more creative fighter, a fighter that has, more fluidity to him, more potentially versatility, and so on. So I would lean towards Jared Anderson at this stage. I mean, you never know what's going to happen if Anderson gets cracked with that big right hand or even a big left hook from Dubois or that solid jab he's got. Maybe that will change Anderson's whole world. And irrespective of how talented and athletic and fluid he is, maybe that will put him in his place. Do you know what I mean? And Dubois will be able to control him. I don't know. But I'm going to go with what I see in my mind's eye, and that is Jared Anderson probably takes Dubois into deep waters and drowns him. And maybe he has to come through some dicey moments early on, but ultimately, he'll stick it on Dubois maybe in the second half of the fight and get him out of there. So that's what I would be going with at this juncture. Maybe if I see Anderson in the next few fights looking vulnerable, I'll change my mind and I'll change my prediction. But as it stands right now, that's what I'll probably go with. Mid to late stoppage for Jared Anderson over Dubois. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think this fight is even realistic? Will it happen? And if, do you think there's any desire on behalf of either of the teams to make the fight happen? And if not, why not? You think that Warren doesn't fancy it, Arum doesn't fancy it, or maybe you think that they want to work together to build a fight like that up for the future rather than having it now, since they're business partners and whatever to some extent. Build it up for, let's say, 2 years from now when Dubois is 27, Jared Anderson's, 24 by then. Maybe it will be a much bigger fight, more lucrative, rather than putting the guys in there at this stage. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below.